Oh, yes.
Welcome back, everyone. This is my third and, unless plans change, final contribution to the Tformers.com Beast Wars 25th Anniversary Celebration Month. My previous two videos, we looked at the combiners that came from the BotCon 2016 convention. First, we had Predacon, who was the official box set, and then we had Magnaboss, who was comprised of two of the BotCon exclusives, plus stickered up versions of regular retail Combiner Wars toys. So today, we're rounding it all up with the remaining figures that were released during BotCon 2016. The only exception here is the Flash Sentry toy, which I do not have, because in order to get it, you had to buy this super mega deluxe ticket, which was far more expensive, and toy-wise, all you got out of it was a little clear purple reflector. So yeah, sadly, I don't have that one. I couldn't bring myself to put down that kind of money on it. So, if you've seen my reviews before, you know this goes. We're going to take a look at these toys, starting on their alt modes. I'll break each one down individually while doing some comparisons and group shots with mold mates and things. Then we'll go ahead, we'll switch over to the robot modes, do the same thing for each of those. And then at the very end of the video, I'll give my final thoughts. So our big posse of exclusive toys here consists of the Predacon Terrorsaur in a pre-beast form, your Reflector trio, back when they could actually use the name Reflector in their trademark. Now he's called Refraktor. Your Maximal Airazor in her pre-beast form. A customization class Combiner Wars Ratchet. And then the centerpiece of BotCon 2016, or at least a lot of people would argue it, and a figure that people have been waiting on for years, we have our Predacon Megatron in what used to be referred to as this Transmetal 3 body before the design was reimagined as a pre-Beast Wars form for the character. And here he has a pre-Beast Wars form, so this is pre-Beast Wars form. And if you read the comic, they explain, how that worked, how he went from this body to the BotCon 2006 body. Of course, the comic is a very dubious continuity, so make of it what you will. You could also imagine him being the Beast Wars Uprising incarnation of the character, because they did use that this design for that. So all these toys, they're all basically like a souvenir type figure. They didn't come in any boxes. They came in just little clear poly bags and stuff. The Ratchet, like I said, was a customization class figure, so you could get this one of two ways. You can either just buy one pre-assembled and unpainted at the convention, or you could have attended the convention's customization class, where you were given Ratchet's pieces on plastic sprues. You had to actually clip them off, assemble them, put all the screws in, do all that stuff, and then you could sticker and paint the toy. And if you attended the customization class, you had several options for, what kind of Ratchet to make this. He could have been Generation 1 Cartoon Ratchet or Generation 1 Comic Ratchet. He could have been a hypothetical Generation 2 Ratchet. He could have been Shattered Glass Ratchet, which we now have an official toy of. Or you could have utilized the included first aid head that was included on the plastic sprue and used paint and stickers to make that the Rescue Bots character Medics. Okay, so let's go ahead. We'll break these down individually now, get a good look at them, talk about where each one comes from before we move on to their robot modes. Okay, we're going to kick this off with our smallest figures, the three Reflectors. Now these are interesting because they're three identical toys that were sold as a 3-pack, much in the same vein as the BotCon Sweeps, which were released some years before that. So there's no molding differences between these guys, and all three of them are a new head retool of the Combiner Wars Legends class Shockwave figure. So because of that, their alt modes are some approximation of Shockwave's old laser gun mode, and they're scaled to be held by combiners because the Shockwave was meant to be held by Bruticus. So they have a flip-out handle, so you can have, a combiner, just really any large character, wield them like that. Or you can flip them in and have them something more of like a little spaceship mode, much like the Siege Shockwave. And these guys are interesting because they're done up in colors which are kind of somewhere between the toy colors and the cartoon colors. So all three of them are purple, like the cartoon Reflectors, but it's a much darker shade of purple. And they also utilize a lot of black and red and even a little bit of blue, much like the original Reflector toy. So they definitely exist in some weird in-between space as far as what they're trying to depict. And these toys are also interesting because they did not appear at all in the Dawn of Predacus like comic book or prose reading or anything. Like, they're really just extras tacked on there that have nothing to do with Beast Wars at all. In fact, the little bit of bio that they got referenced events that were very similar to the events that occurred in the, at the time, current IDW comics. Where they kind of referenced the way that the characters died in those comics, and then they were, I guess, brought back to life by G-Axis. Of course, that was never depicted in the comics as happening, but I guess if you squint a little, you could imagine that it just kind of happened off panel somewhere. Maybe these are IDW incarnations of Reflector. I'm not really sure. Here's a quick comparison shot with the Combiner War Shockwave. And you can see same toy as far as molding. There's the head, but we'll see that in robot mode. And just completely different color scheme. And also, noticeably, far less paint on the retail figure than the BotCon toy, though that's pretty par for the course. The FunPub BotCon toys and club exclusives, they did tend to have a higher paint budget, since they were kind of exclusive, low production toys. And you can definitely see that here, because this guy's pretty slathered in paint, whereas Shockwave, so, I mean, he gets a tampo right here. These bits are painted, though there's a lot less paint on the Shockwave one. And another tampo, and that's pretty much it for paint. Very minimalist. They really didn't start putting much in the paint apps until War for Seibertron came along. And even that could be a little skimpy sometimes. Now here's a shot with the Siege Refraktor toy, which is just a renamed Reflector for copyright reasons. And it's really interesting because Reflector never had any sort of like a spaceship or, you know, pistol mode or anything prior to these BotCon toys. And in fact, the BotCon toys, the reason these exist is because Hasbro had pre-tooled a Reflector head with the Shockwave mold, and they never ended up using it. And you'll actually see a couple examples of that here. So FunPub went and got permission to use the unused head and create Reflector toys. And they did it as a 3-pack, as, you know, Reflector usually comes in the trio. Now what's interesting is that they seem to, like, Hasbro seems to have not forgotten the idea they had, because when they made a Siege Reflector, in order to give each of the toys separate alt modes so they didn't have to be sold as one set, they gave them something which looks very similar. Very, very similar to the Combiner Wars toy. Now this is officially a spaceship. It's not meant to be a cannon or anything, but I mean, you can imagine it as just being an oversized version of that. So it's interesting how that played out. I do wonder if is it coincidence, or did they really kind of go back to this idea from about 2015 or so and realize, like, hey, we could do that? Okay, now here is the kind of hidden third mode for the Reflector trio. This is the camera mode. Now this mode is of questionable officiality because there's no instructions for it. The best we got was a set of these done up this way in a glass display case at the BotCon. So I don't think it was a mode that was ever intended. You know, I don't think Hasbro really took it that far when they pre-tooled ahead. They just saw it as like a quick, you know, slot to fill. But the FunPub guys, they did their best coming up with the camera, and I mean, it's, you know, it's a floppy mess. It's not really meant to be like this, but, you know, working with what they had, I'd say they actually did a pretty good job. I mean, if somebody told me this was a camera, I'd be like, well, okay, yeah, maybe they just got like a real long lens attachment on it. Sure, okay, I'll buy that. So yeah, you won't find instructions for this anywhere, but I'll give you a little look around. There's pictures of it online too, but if you want to like pause this at certain points to see how it goes together, if you ever want to build this yourself, that's how that works. So there's that camera mode. And then to compare it, we have the Siege Reflectors or Refraktors in their camera mode. And obviously this one works way better because it's a mold that was designed from the ground up to be Reflector. And then you could always take it a step further if you have the Toy Colors gift set and make an even nicer camera mode. But, you know, for the sake of comparing like for like, I'm just going to show this one. So yeah, obviously this pales in comparison to, you know, what they can achieve a few years later with a very intentional Reflector design. Next on our list is Deluxe Class Terrorsaur. And Terrorsaur is a new head retool of the aerial bot Air Raid. though he's done up in very, very different colors and is given extensive paint apps to homage his beast form, a lot like Cicadacon from the Predacon set. So he gets this kind of like scaly, fleshy splotching on the wings, and then he actually gets a beak, much like Terrorsaur had. So they really went out of their way to make him look like the character, you know, make him recognizable as Terrorsaur, even in a jet mode, instead of, you know, being some sort of pterodactyl or pterodon or pteranodon. People keep correcting me like pteranodon. That's what it is. Here, for comparison, is the Combiner Wars Air Raid. Just so you can see how much they change as far as plastic color and paint layout. I mean, they really did a number on this guy. And the really bizarre thing about Terrorsaur here, you'll notice he doesn't have a hand-foot gun or, you know, combiner limb accessory, whatever you want to call it. And it's true, he was not given one of those. It wasn't included with him at all. And to this day, I still don't know if that was like intentional cost cutting or just a mistake, because there were sadly some QC issues and some mistakes made with the final BotCon pieces. So I don't know if they meant to leave that piece out. I always thought he was intended to be kind of like a swap-in limb for the Predacon Combiner, but obviously, you know, you can't do that if you don't have a hand or foot. I mean, yes, realistically, you could just borrow another one, but you know, it's supposed to be kind of a self-contained thing. And oddly enough, his eventual recolor, the subscription service fractal figure, did come with his hand-foot gun. So, yeah, I don't know, and it really is a shame because I would have loved to actually like show him off, you know, as part of a combiner, but he's really officially not a combiner. It's weird. Next, we have Deluxe Class Airazor. And Airazor is a direct redeco of the Transformers Legends Slipstream toy, which was itself a fairly extensive retool of Thrilling 30 or Legends Windblade. And honestly, in my opinion, this is like the perfect mold choice. Not only do I just really like this mold, it's kind of hard to stand up sometimes because it's kind of delicate, but to me, like, this mold was the best mold that they ever did for Windblade. Like, hands down, really, really nice. And then the Slipstream toy was really awesome too. Sadly, I never got that one because I didn't really have the funds back when that was out to buy like the Japanese stuff. But I regret it because this toy showed me just how really awesome that version is. And then we can pull out Windblade, because I do have Windblade, just to show you how they compare. And the jet modes are very, very similar. There's not a huge difference. The difference between these two just comes specifically in the head sculpt and the accessories. So when you go ahead and flip them upside down, you can see Windblade's sword and sheath can be stored underneath, though they look kind of silly. And then Airazor has missiles, very Seeker style, because, you know, she was based on a Seeker. Oh yeah, the cockpit section is different too. They did retool the chest to make it more Seeker-like. And then outside of that, I think it's all the same. So yeah, really, really good choice for the character, and you'll see why even more in the robot mode. I think the head sculpt and everything works for her. But, you know, she normally turns into a Falcon, so a jet would be a very good vehicular alternative to that. All right, for our last deluxe, we get the custom class Ratchet. And you can see my Ratchet is stickered, but he is not painted. The stickers, if you didn't attend the customization class, they did offer just one of the sticker sheets, like after the fact, that you could have bought through the club. And it was just the sticker sheet that allowed you to make him either the cartoon or comics G1 Ratchet. I opted for the comic look because it's one that doesn't really get touched that often, and I kind of like Ratchet's comic look. So that's what I went for. And honestly, the stickers, they do a pretty good job of fleshing it out, especially in the vehicle mode. I mean, it covers the windshields, you get the little, like, Autobot Red Cross symbol, some striping. You get this optional Autobot sticker up here, which I just put on there because it looked cool. Even the back here. So, yeah, overall, not too bad, even without the paint. And the only reason I haven't painted it is because I'm really just scared I'm going to mess it up. Like, I don't want this thing to look like a sloppy custom job. I want, you know, the paint to be so good that it looks like it's meant to be there, right? Like it's factory applied or something. So I'm kind of waiting till I either get up the nerve to do it or can, like, find somebody who's, like, good enough to do it that maybe I can pay them some money to paint it for me. We'll see. Now, this toy is a new head retool of the Combiner Wars First Aid. So I have that here for comparison. And, I mean, it makes sense, right? They both turn into an ambulance, so I mean, it's the perfect alt mode. And he is actually in the same camp as Reflector in that he uses a head that was pre-tooled for the mold and then wasn't used. The big difference, though, is whereas the Reflector head never did get used outside the convention, eventually Takara did release Ratchet in their Unite Warriors line, and he was actually part of the Skylinks combiner, or as they call it in Japan, Lynx Master. So if you missed out on the BotCon one, you could have always gotten it that way, though that wouldn't have been much cheaper because, you know, you're talking, it was what, maybe $160 to get it over here in the US. Now, one thing that's pretty notable with Ratchet is that his axe weapon and his hand-foot gun are done up in translucent blue. And that was actually explained away in the different bios for the different versions of the character. It acts as kind of like a self-regenerating, like a repair type function. So basically Ratchet was like your swap out character for really could be any combiner, but he was explicitly paired with Defensor as a stand-in for, you know, one of his limbs. And the G2 Ratchet was even considered a stand-in for G2 Defensor. However, that G2 Defensor never ended up actually happening. It was like the one G2 combiner we did not get in a box set, right? We got Bruticus, we got Menasor, we got Spirion, and then they never brought us Defensor. To this day, I'm hoping they still change our minds and give us one, but I think considering it's been like 5 years now, I don't see that happening. So it is a shame they never saw that through, because if you are lucky enough to own a G2 Ratchet, you know, you could pair him with that hypothetical combiner. And now we come back to our centerpiece, the Beast Wars Megatron, and this thing is just beautiful. It really is. Like the reds, the oranges, the golds, even the purple, like, I mean, just work so well for this. And, you know, as I mentioned, this was a toy that had been planned years prior as part of a, what was it called, the OTFCC convention, when BotCon was on that, like, brief hiatus. And it never saw fruition because that convention got canceled, and they, you know, finally revived the concept for the final BotCon. And originally, it was seen as a Transmetal 3 form, right? Because Transmetal 2 Megatron was a dragon. So where do you go from there? Well, a two-headed dragon. And, you know, a 6 or 10 changer at that. Because this toy is a new head retool of the Robots in Disguise Megatron. Or Car Robots Gigatron, if you're, you know, from the East. And honestly, it's just such a perfect mold for like a souped up, awesome version of the character. And this toy proved to be so popular that they ran out of stock like at the convention. Like if you didn't get in line day one quickly to get one, you were just out of luck. They ran out of them because they were so popular. And I consider myself very lucky to have picked one up because this is one of the most precious pieces to me in my entire collection. You know, I'm a huge Beast Wars fan. I never got to go to a BotCon until the final one. Love Megatron. I love this mold. So for me to have this, I get excited every time I look at it. I love this thing. Now this toy, however, wasn't perfect. There were some kind of factory screw-ups that left it missing some like paint or sticker details. For one, the dragon eyes, they have stickers on them because if you bought the toy as is, there was just nothing there. It was just red plastic. So it was like an eyeless dragon. And apparently that was not intentional. There were supposed to be eyes painted on there and it was a factory mess up. So what they did was they included stickers on the same sticker sheet that you use to spruce up your retail combiner dudes for the Magnaboss combiner. So you're able to put eyes on the dragon. Additionally, his spark crystal, which is something that hasn't been seen since RID, didn't have this Predacon symbol on here. This is another sticker you had to put on. In fact, I don't know if you can really tell, but the spark crystal that's on there was actually a Dinobot spark crystal, like the Beast Machine's Dinobots. How that ended up happening, I'm not entirely sure because the original version of this mold did have a Predacon one. But yeah, it's oddly enough, it's got that like Triceratops symbol underneath the sticker. So aside from those little factory oopsies, this thing is a beautiful, beautiful toy. Especially, like, I love the gold accents. However, there's a bit of an issue. If you can look very closely at it, you may be able to see kind of a cracking going on, a little crackling effect, which means that this vacuum metallization is starting to break down now. And that's, you know, something I'm always afraid of with any vacuum metallized parts, because for some toys they seem to last forever, and then for others, just by, you know, existing, the paint starts to crackle and flake off, and like you just touch it with your finger and it comes off on your skin. And I've kept this guy in like very good like climate controlled areas, and it's already starting to happen 5 years later, so that's worrisome. And I'll show you here with the Megatron. Here he is, RID Megatron. There are parts on my Megatron toy that, despite my best efforts, that paint is already coming off. So I sadly think that this guy is doomed to just have paint get lost, which is a shame because it is such a valuable piece. Like, it's going to kill me when that paint just starts to crackle away. But you can see, you know, he's based on such an awesome mold. I mean, they do not make toys like RID Megatron / Gigatron anymore. If they were to re-release this today, I guarantee they would charge at least Commander prices for it, right? You're probably looking at 80, 85 bucks for something that, you know, back in the day was, what, $40 maybe? Like, yeah. But RID was also known for having a level of engineering that is just pretty unmatched today. Now, articulation wasn't always great, but as far as the engineered transformations, sometimes they were too complex for people, especially like the Autobot cars. People really struggled with those. You know, very, very fiddly little things. But yeah, when you look at the stuff that came out of that toy line, whether it's the Gigatron, your Fire Convoy, Magnus, I mean, those things were above and beyond when it comes to the material quality, the engineering, all that. I mean, you really just don't see stuff like that these days. This Megatron, being a retool of this guy, is capable of assuming really all 10 modes that the mold is capable of assuming, minus maybe the bat mode because they removed like the ears and the little bat snout to make the new head fit inside. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all those modes because this would be a very, very long review if I did. So I do apologize if you were looking forward to that, but you know, to me, the two most important modes are the Dragon and the Robot because those are Megatron's classic alt modes. Okay, now it's time to do our robot modes, so we move all the way back to our Legends class Reflectors. And here you can see they truly are just new head retools of Shockwave. And again, all three are identical. So if you take him, you take Shockwave, you can see the difference. A lot more paint yet again. And oddly, because they never bothered to like retool the lower arm, they never put like an alternate tooling, they all end up with Shockwave's little cannon arm, which is not something the characters have ever had before. So it is a little odd looking, but oh well. And then here's a comparison to the more modern Deluxe Reflector, so you can see. I mean, they do a fairly good job, right? The Shockwave mold is not a terrible mold if you're going to do like a quick retool, because he has that window chest thing going on. And that is just a very iconic part of Reflector's look. And, you know, the head sculpts, I mean, they pretty much kill it. They do a really good job. Now, granted, you know, they were official head sculpts, so Hasbro made them. It's kind of cheating. But I think it works overall. Like, yeah, the cannon arms are a little weird, but, you know, before we actually got a proper update several years later, this was the closest thing you had to, like, true Reflector toys since the very originals. Okay, now we have Terrorsaur again, along with his mold mate Air Raid. And you can see how a different paint layout really just affects the look of the toy. Yeah, they took a figure that really has nothing to do with Terrorsaur and did a pretty good job of making a mechanical-looking version of the character. Now, in fact, he's a little plain-looking compared to Air Raid, but they're going off the source material. And, you know, in the source material, Terrorsaur wasn't very colorful, right? It was like almost all red and then had some silver accents. So they really captured that here. And I think it looks pretty good. The head sculpt, this is an original head sculpt for BotCon, and it's pretty good, I gotta say. One of the better ones, I think better than anything on Predacon, honestly. And overall, I really like it. And it's really only held back by the fact that it doesn't have a combiner hand. Like, he's pretty much just maimed from the get-go. Okay, now we get Airazor again in a robot mode next to Windblade. And this really shows off the tooling differences between the two. Again, completely different heads, new chest pieces, new weapons. Now you may notice that my Airazor has a big black spot right where her nose would go. And this happened when I did my Kingdom Airazor review. I transformed her. Somehow that caused some of the yellow paint to get flaked off, which I'm really upset about because it's I mean, it's right there, just right smack in the middle of her face, and it makes it look like she has a dog nose. And I hate that happened. And unfortunately, there's not really much I can do about it now. But I will say that, like I said, the mold choice, really, really good for her, because the Slipstream head does bear, a slight resemblance to Airazor's, Beast Wars head. It even kind of looks like there's a falcon bill coming down here. So it works out really well. Plus they give her all this painted detail that makes it look like there's some feathering going on, which is, reminiscent of how she would look with bird feathers. And overall, I think it works out really well. Also, the forearm-mounted blasters are another nod to Airazor's Beast Wars design. Speaking of her Beast Wars design, here is Kingdom Airazor, so you can see how the character normally looks, because, Kingdom Airazor really crushed the on-screen accuracy. But you can see all the cues there, right? You have this bird-like bill thing for a helmet. You have the big shoulder pads. You have the forearm blasters. And naturally, they both have wings on their back. So, yeah, I think this is just a really solid choice. And a lot better than the previous club-exclusive Airazor, which was a retool of the Energon Slugslinger mold. And I never liked that choice for Airazor. Way too big, way too bulky looking. This, to me, is a much, much better choice. I do wonder why they opted for so much black instead of a brownish color. Granted, Kingdom Airazor's browns are a bit lighter than they really should be for screen accuracy. But, straight black, though, it looks good for what it is. Just as a toy, it looks fantastic. But I do wonder why they didn't go with a color that's a little more accurate to her Beast Wars form. All right, now we're back to our customization class figure, Ratchet. And next to him, naturally, is First Aid. And you can see what a difference all that paint makes. First Aid has much more of a color breakup than my unpainted Ratchet does. But now, at least in this mode, you can see the head sculpt. And even though it's completely white and unpainted, there's a lot of detail. In fact, not having any paint on it really helps that detail pop. They really, really gave him this nice, well-lined head sculpt. Again, it's a Hasbro one, but I am glad that FunPub was able to revive that, even if it did eventually just get revived anyway. Now, unlike Terrorsaur, who doesn't have any official combiner that he's a part of, Ratchet actually is officially part of a combiner, though a very, very unknown one. And that was a combiner that was called Modulus, and it appeared just in a set of instructions for the Shatterglass Starscream, which was one of the very last toys released by the club. Unfortunately, I can't show that off either, because in order to build Modulus, you need Kabador, Scattershot, and Rook, who are not hard to find. You also need the Shatterglass Starscream, which I have, but you also need this Ratchet and the medics that I talked about earlier from the customization class. So if you're one of the very few people who are lucky enough to have chosen medics as your version of Ratchet that you wanted to build, which frankly, how many people did that, right? When you had a chance to get a Ratchet toy, which, we didn't really have much at the time. And then also have, some, G1 version of Ratchet. How many people? I could probably count on, both my hands actually have those. So yeah, obviously I don't have medics, so I can't really show that off. And lastly, we go back to our absolutely gorgeous Megatron, along with his mold mate. Well, Megatron. Now this, there you can see why this sold out. It is just so cool. It's a shame we've never seen this in any sort of media or anything, Megatron taking on this very awesome form. As either an early form or a final form, because, this mold was just made for him. It's awesome. Now, don't get me wrong, the Gigatron version of it is equally cool, right? It's cool in its own right. They have very different colors, but each one is just doing its own thing, right? He's meant to look very fiery, very lava-like. He's meant to be more of a very gaudy Decepticon leader, and they both just do what they're trying to do very well. This right here is a design that's so good, I can't imagine them ever doing an update to this toy. Not only financially, I don't think, like I said, that you would ever get this for less than Commander price, but what could you really do? Give it opening hands, maybe? He's so up there in terms of engineering that it'd be very difficult to do an update of either version of these and have it do any justice to the original. They'd have to cut corners somewhere. I just don't see them being able to recreate this in today's market. But yeah, I adore this thing. Like, it's, you know, if I had to sell off like 95% of my 99% of my collection, he would survive. He would be there. Because I just absolutely love having this dude. Now, to help demonstrate just how great of a job they did on this guy's head sculpt, here's our most recent Beast Wars Megatron, the Kingdom version, who has, you know, in my opinion, the best head sculpt of any version of that character, outside of maybe Masterpiece. So you can see how they line up. Now, this one's head, it's a little bit rounder than the classic like T-Rex Megatron form, but again, it's a new form, so the details don't have to line up exactly. It just has to be recognizable as that character. And I gotta say, for something that's FunPub initiated, and they really knocked it out of the park with this guy, right? Their original head molds aren't really known for being as good as like the Hasbro or Takara initiated ones, but I think that for one of their swan song figures, they just did absolutely amazing with this. Like, it does have some softness to the sculpting. Like, I could look at this and, you know, pick it apart and tell, like, yeah, this isn't, you know, a Hasbro initiated one. It doesn't have the really fine-tuning that something like this does. But it's a lot better than some of the ones that they've put out over the years. And the fact that they, you know, they got it to fit just kind of perfectly inside of the chest cavity of this toy just speaks to how badly they wanted to make this thing good. Now, for an example of not a very great sculpt, here is the Transmetal 2 Dragon Megatron upon which this is based. And Transmetal 2 Megatron, you know, was such an awesome, awesome form that the character took on and, you know, the tail end of the show. But his toy really never quite lived up to the look and everything. It's really compromised by gimmicks, and honestly, I mean, I didn't get this guy till years and years later, and I was just disappointed when I finally got it. I'm like, man, this really isn't that great. Especially when you have, you know, really great things out there like Optimal Optimus. So, yeah, I think that this new sculpt, despite not being, like, really first party, is better than the original, you know, TM2 Megatrons. I mean, I want to love this toy, but I never really could. I could never bring myself to really... I mean, parts of it look great. The vacuum metal, plastic, all that looks great, but they could have done a lot better. And luckily, according to some rumors and leaks and all that, we are supposedly getting a new Dragon Megatron here in, like, the Legacy toy line. So I can't wait to see that. They did such a fantastic job upgrading the T-Rex form for Kingdom. I'd love to see what they do with this design to make it, you know, halfway as cool as this thing right here. And this completes our look at the souvenir figures from BotCon 2016. Overall, I like all of these. They all look really fantastic for what they are. Yeah, I know my Ratchet's not painted, and one day, hopefully, I'll get someone to paint him, as well as my Strika from the 2013 BotCon, I think. You get somebody to do those, like, professionally. But I do think each one of these releases shines in its own way. Now, I mentioned how there were some, you know, kind of QC issues and some shortcomings, right? When we come to, like, the combiner hand for Terrorsaur, the lack of stickers on Megatron. But at least in Megatron's case, those were rectified for, you know, relatively little money. Terrorsaur, the poor guy, he's just left in the dust. He'll never get to be a combiner. But I am pleased with what we actually do get. The reflectors, again, really random inclusion. Like, I think they're really only here because there was an extra set of heads laying around. I think the same thing for Ratchet, right? Like, why was Ratchet in a Dawn of the Predacon themed BotCon? Like, he has nothing to do with it. Now, it's not unusual. A lot of the times they would have characters that weren't part of the convention theme that were just released as figures anyway. But, you know, these guys, they do kind of stick out like a sore thumb in an otherwise Beast Wars-based toy line, or, you know, subline. And it is true that they've both been usurped by much more modern versions of themselves. But back in 2016, I mean, this is what you got. This was like the only G1 Ratchet and G1 Reflector you really had. So with the context in mind, I think it came out really well. The Airazor is really nice. You know, she's one of my favorite characters. She comes from one of my favorite molds. And of course, the Megatron is just a thing of beauty. Absolute grail. So, yeah, I do like these. I did enjoy getting to just show off some of the odds and ends from BotCon 2016, right? These guys weren't part of, like, the big two combiners that everything was kind of centered around. but they really help flesh out the convention showings and really just give you some fun stuff to collect. Now, having said my piece, I hope you all really enjoyed this little review at some old BotCon toys. Again, it's all themed around Beast Wars, which is what this month is all about over on Tformers.com. And I am very happy that they allowed me to take part in the celebration as an avid Beast Wars fan and really contribute to it and just, again, show off some of the more obscure Beast Wars stuff, the things that you don't typically think of when you think Beast Era. So I do hope you enjoyed this little look back in time. If you did enjoy this review, make sure to toss it a like and let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this look at the 2016 BotCon souvenir figures. And with all that said, I will see you next time.